Thank you, and good morning, everyone. For those of you at the back, there are a few seats at the front just in case there's issues with either seeing or hearing me. I'm going to stand up rather than sit down so that way that you can all see. I know that it is Ramadan, but for those of you who aren't fasting, we do have really great coffee here. 115 Coffee, the cafe is open, and feel free to get up during the presentation if you'd like to partake. So my presentation today really talks about the establishment of the museum, why we did it, how we did it, and where we see ourselves going in the future, how we see ourselves interacting with our communities and building a community of art lovers here not just in Jakarta, but across Indonesia. So it will touch on some of the ideas about this month, which are around preservation, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of how a museum is involved in some of these ideas around preservation. So, first slide, thanks. Okay, so the museum was established in November 2017. We're only in our second operational year. And we were developed because of probably three reasons. There are three key areas behind the vision and the mission of the museum. One is that we wanted to actually build a museum in Jakarta. So for those of you who are familiar with other museums and galleries, often that they're located within historic buildings, that they struggle with infrastructure. We offer something very, very different. We're an international art museum. We house quite a large collection of about 800 modern and contemporary works from across Indonesia and also across the world. We have a facility which is able to manage the climate. So one of the great challenges about presenting and preserving art in the tropics is humidity. So this building has the ability to be able to control humidity and temperature, and that's really very important in terms of preservation. So one, we really wanted to build a museum because we see that Indonesia is there is a lack of infrastructure, and it is important if we want to present great exhibitions and engage our communities with art, that we need to build that infrastructure. Secondly, we wanted to educate because, and I'll go through some statistics a little bit later, this is a very, very big country. Jakarta is a very big city. We have great diversity in terms of language, in terms of religions, and also ethnicity. Art is one way in which we can create a better understanding of other people. It creates empathy, and I'll also talk a little bit about that later. But education is really key if we want to encourage innovation and amongst our young people for the future. So, and you guys are all involved in this morning called Creative Mornings. So you will actually understand the role of the creative industries for the future, and that's actually needs to start with art education at schools. And thirdly, the museum is also about cultural exchange. So we see ourselves, we're not a national museum. We're actually an international art museum. And so what we see ourselves as being a little bit of a bridge between Indonesia and the rest of the world. So if you followed our programs, there's always an international component to what we do. It's not just about presenting Indonesian art. When we present Indonesian art, we present it in the context of what's going on in the world. So we want to have that conversation that's, to support discussions here, and also to encourage discussions amongst, throughout the Southeast Asian region and also around the world. Yes, thanks. Next one. And the next one. Yeah. Okay. So some of the really early ideas about that we've been having within the museum is really around accessibility. we want to ensure that the museum is accessible, because accessibility is also about the future sustainability of the museum. We are a private museum, but we also function as a public space. We realize that we have a public duty, a civic duty, in terms of all of those things that I said about education. So accessibility is a really important part of the things that we are interested in. And accessibility is also about preservation. So if we don't involve our people from diverse backgrounds into the conversations that are going on in the museum, how can we expect society as the greater society to be involved in these conversations about the role of the museum? I mean, the role of the museum is not just here for particular classes and for particular people of an education standing to come and experience the museum. The role of the museum has to have an impact society-wide. And this is also, I think, very closely related to ideas of preservation. Indonesia is complex, and I'm not Indonesian. I came to Jakarta from Australia, and one of the first things that really strikes me is that Indonesia, it's the fourth most populous country. There's over 250 million people. The religious and ethnic diversity, extremes of wealth and poverty, and the constraint of infrastructure have meant that it was only really in 2017 that a museum of this scale was built. But it also illustrates that there is great potential. I mean, the other thing coming from outside is that if you look at all of the factors around disruption, that they occur especially because of the size of the population and the creativity of Indonesians. So if you think about technology disruption and the ways in which we all now communicate online, there is a great possibility and great potential, I think, in harnessing creativity, innovation, and also the greater population. Yeah. So the museum, I think that these statistics, I mean, you will all know this, but I think it's good to be reminded about the potential that exists here. That young people outnumber the aging population, and that is almost a very, very different situation than what occurs in most Western territories, especially when it comes to museums. I mean, museums in the West are trying to work out how to engage with young people, when in fact, actually, young people are wanting to engage with us already, and that's through social media, and that's through, of course, through visitation. And we can talk about social media as well. So 130 million social media users, 350 million SIM cards that are registered to Indonesia. So that, I think, really does illustrate something of the potential. Yeah. So what about us? So we've in about 18 months, some of these statistics might be a little bit old, but they represented the first 12 months of our operation. Most of our audience are female, so 70% of our audience are women, and they're young, they're 18 to 29-year-olds. Then the next big group is our young families, so it's the next bracket above the millennials, and where our audience is mostly middle class. Okay, so I'm a little bit all over the place. I'll talk a little bit more about what the museum. There's about 7,000 square meters in the whole facility. That includes storage and conservation. And we have about 3,500, nearly 4,000 square meters of gallery spaces. And a little bit later on today, we'll do a little tour of this current exhibition. If you haven't seen the museum, you'll be able to experience it then. But what we're looking at is images from across our exhibitions, and it reinforces, I think, the kind of international and global perspective that we have. So we've seen artworks from Japan. This is a work by Yayoi Kusama, and it also is illustrates one of the programs that our education team manages. Before the museum was even opened, we had made a major commitment to education. So there are at least 4 major pillars of our education program. One is we bring kids into the museum. So we have a sponsor. Our sponsor is UOB, and with their support, they underwrite most of our education activities. And one of those things is we have a quota each year of bringing kids from state schools who may not have the capacity to come and do a visit, come into the museum. Secondly, we run a space called the Children's Art Space, and you'll see that a little bit later today. And it's a place where we commission artists to make installations for kids. We know that if we want to engage with the future, sustainability is also making sure that from a young age we capture the hearts and minds of kids and their parents. So the Children's Art Space is a way of being able to demystify some of the larger conversations that we might be having in the museum. The third thing that the education team does is that they do outreach. They go out to schools. So, you know, we're probably all very lucky because we have an understanding of what a museum is. But for most people, this is not the case. A lot of our audience, it's the first time that they've even been inside a museum. And so we need to make that effort to go and speak to principals and also teachers in the places where they are, to talk to them about what we do, and to encourage them to see the museum as being a partner, a resource partner for their activities. And then the fourth thing that we do is what we call the Teachers Education, the Educators Forum. So twice a year, coinciding with our major exhibitions, we bring teachers into the museum. It's a free program. They do a workshop. They get access to the curators and special guest speakers, and then they also get to talk amongst themselves. So it's really important for us to get that feedback from them in terms of the challenges that they face in the classroom. And one of the workshops that they do is they edit the materials that we are about to publish for other teachers. So twice a year we publish an educator's resource kit. So it's actually pretty much a teaching resource for inside the classroom. That group actually edits that material before it gets printed, and it's a way of being able to create a feedback loop between us, the museum, and the teachers and the kids. Okay. So we've had a number of different types of exhibitions. I mean, we not only present painting, but we've also have a commitment to performance. So the exhibition we had our last major exhibition was 2 artists, Aramayani, an Indonesian, very, very important Indonesian artist, and Lee Ming-wei, a Taiwanese artist. So there's always a connection that we make between the local and the international. Generally, they're the same generation of artists. Aramayani is very well known globally, but probably less well known in Indonesia. And one of the reasons is because her work is quite ephemeral. It's about performance. Her work responds to the politics and the society of the time. And so it's a way for us, when we make these exhibitions, we want to ensure that our audiences see their own history and their politics and society being represented in the displays and the exhibitions. And then this artist, Lee Ming-wei, he's a Taiwanese artist, and it's always about interaction. So it's always about the audience as being the last, as the one who actually completes the work. So what we see here is one of the major works of his called Sonic Blossom. We have a a classically trained singer, who is singing one of 4 Schubert Lieder. And they walk around the gallery, and then they will come up to a stranger, and they will go to them, "Would you like a gift of song?" And if that stranger says yes, they sit down, and then they have a very, very intimate concert between the two. It's very touching. Lots of tears, but also it's so simple that when I explain it, you really miss how magical and transformative It really is. And so the reason why we made this project was to illustrate to the public that there are many different ways to engage with art. Art is not just what you see in the wall. Art is also something that can have a big impact. It touches your heart, and it can change the way that you think, how that you live, and it can be very straightforward. Okay. So. Can we go back? There's a slide that talks about the non-accessibility, the definition of a museum. Yeah. Okay. So what is a museum? This is a place that I actually really like to start. So we're kind of going. I'm taking you on a little bit of a journey, because it is really important to remember why we exist and what we expect from a museum, especially in places where museum culture is not so well understood. And this is a framework that I really like to use. It doesn't always hold true, but I think it's a very good place to start. Museums provide intellectual, aesthetic, and emotional experiences which give a visitor insight into history, themselves, and the world around them. So we break this down, there are two things that happen in a museum. They're both rational, and it's also emotional. And this is where I want to come back to this idea of preservation. So preservation, which is the kind of topic of conversation for this month, needs to be balanced with innovation. Preservation, we can't just be caught up into the past, but we also have to find ways in which those ideas from the past can continue to impact us now, so that we can innovate for the future. And so within this kind of duality between rationality and emotion is the museum. And it is also where art appreciation and art education sits. And so it's really a driving force of the museum. It's something that I think is a new concept here in Indonesia. I mean, there are a number of expectations around museums here, which are really around selfies and Instagram. But I think it's really important for us to remember that it is all about plus creating knowledge and ensuring that we are building a society that is critical and engaged with the world. And so I'm going to really maybe just leave it at that, because it'd be good to answer questions and get feedback from you guys as well. Okay, thank you.